Hello everyone, this is Tactical Lich here and welcome to another episode of Total War Warhammer 2 Army Build Testing Logs. So, for the theme of the day we have a Slayer army build. And this is actually pretty viable ever since the introduction of the runic magic system for the dwarves. Now, for the army core we have a whole front line of Slayers, a back line of a couple giant Slayers and also another Slayer. In the middle for the missile pressure we have 3 Rangers chevron up due to some leftover funds. And of course, Master Engineers coming in with Fiery Ring of Thorek and Flash Bomb. As for the leadership, we have Thorek Ironbrow using his runic magic for support, with Rune of Slowness to debuff enemy speed, Rune of Speed to buff up the attack of dwarf infantry, Rune of Negation for emergency damage resistance, and the very powerful Rune of Doom. The melee attack map wide buff is very useful in this kind of army build. This is actually battle from a stream I made a week ago. Basically, in that stream I was using just basically this, an army core of Slayer unit to fight every battle I face in quick battles. And this time we're facing the Dark Elves, who are bringing a very wide infantry line with a couple of Harganev Executioners flanking a front line of Bleak Swords mixed in with Black Ark Corsairs, a couple of Dark Shards at the back, and a couple Reaper Bolt Throwers no doubt prepared for some artillery showdown. Unfortunately, we did not bring any long-range firepower. We have some Harpies in the air ready to disrupt the Dwarfish artillery fire and missile fire, and Morathi bring in Soul Blight and Soul Stealer. And in the back here, we have a couple Dark Riders with shields ready to pounce on the Dwarf missile infantry. And that's basically it for army builds. Let's get the battle started and see how it plays out. As the battle begins, we have both armies pushing forward, trying to meet their infantry in the middle of the battlefield, going for that glorious hand-to-hand combat. In the shadows, we have the Dark Riders riding out from the tree line, revealing themselves, no doubt going to threaten the back line of the dwarves. Of course, the bolt throwers with the target in range are already firing, but given that there are no good targets to shoot at, yes, they can try to shoot at Thorek Ironbrow, but given he has 40% resistance against physical missiles, a lot of potential damage will be ignored by him. So instead they switch to scatter shots, trying to focus down the range power of the dwarves before they can get into position and focus down the bolt throwers or dark shards. There's a bit of pressure coming in from the Dark Riders trying to shut down the Rangers firing, but with the Slayers coming in for screening, the Dark Riders have no choice but to back off. Harpies now in the air does not have that kind of concern, so they drop down straight into the Rangers, already dishing out some damage. Now back to the front line. Axes clashing against swords, melee combat is well and truly underway. Giant Slayers clashing into Black Ark Corsairs, taking some damage, but of course their armor piercing comes in really handy in breaking the back of these Black Ark Corsairs, already routing, while the regular Slayers are just cutting their way through Bleak Swords. Especially now that Thorek has hammered his magic into the battlefield, using the Rune of Doom to leave a mark on the map, empowering his Dolphin troops with that 24 melee attack buff. Combined with the Master Rune of Speed, another 24 melee attack, they were able to do some pretty hefty damage against these Harganev Executioners. While these Giant Slayers are now pushing for the back line, Giant Slayers shutting down Dark Shots, driving them away, while Slayers cutting through these Reaper Bolt Throwers while being shot at by Dark Shards. Thorek Ironbrow as well coming into assistance. The Dwarven backlines are a bit of a mess as well. Dark Riders rushing in after the Harpies get routed, trying to silence the Rangers again. But the Rangers are not exactly bad at melee combat, and with the close support of some Slayers rushing in, these Dark Riders are not long for this world, while these Rangers are barely holding on against the Harpy onslaught. In the front line, of course, Dark Shards are now trying to focus down Thorek Ironbrow, who realized he is a little bit too overextended, so he's going to retreat back to the safety of his own people, although there isn't really much of a front line over here. Slayers are destroying this unit of Dark Riders, now going back to support the Master Engineers who have been shooting at Morathi the whole time, now finally getting surrounded and shut down by the Harganev Executioners. Morathi though already down to half health even with all the Soul Stealers going down, probably because of the miscast given by Thorek Ironbrow's abilities as well as the chip damage from the Master Engineers. Now, a Soul Stealer is going down in the fray, trying to drain away the health of the Dwarfish units, but The thing is, Thorek doesn't care, and instead he's beating back Morathi even with her anti-large attacks, swinging his runic hammer like an absolute Chad, cause he's way too tanky. Yes, Soul Stealer is a threatening spell against single entities and blobs, especially after the buff. But Thorek with a Master Rune of Negation providing that 40% war save and also his innate magic resistance of 40%, he doesn't care. Basically, he's just not taking a lot of damage from the Soul Stealer while being an absolute anchor in the front line, securing the Master Engineers so that they can start shooting at Morathi again. Things are looking pretty good for the dwarves right now. They basically won the main infantry engagements. These Harganev executioners are running out of steam, getting tangled upon unbreakable slayers and getting hammered by the Thorek Ironbrows, armor piercing attacks, as well as getting focus from the rangers. At the back, these dark shards as well as regrouped dark elf infantry are now getting cut down or at least tangled up by the giant slayers. They have no way to rout these unbreakable infantry, so they have to fight to the death. However, Morathi in the front line diving down again, trying to assassinate Thorek Ironbrow, just not having any luck. The thing with Morathi is if she dives down in this battle to try to assassinate anything, all the slayers will just surround her and give her hell with all the anti-large melee attacks. All she could do was stay up in the sky and get shot at and provide some support magic, or else she'll risk getting cut down to pieces by some angry naked dwarf. And with that, yet another grudge is settled, and the Dawi shall claim victory. Now for a bit of quick post-battle analysis. As one of my viewers said during the stream, this matchup is actually rather optimal with this kind of army build for my Slayer army. There's a regular front line and then a regular back line with not a lot of range skirmishing power. They stand still and shoot back. So I can easily break through the front line and start charging down, running down their back lines. And as a result, the Slayers who are facing off a lot of Bleak Swords did alright. This one even getting a chevron with them fending off the Dark Riders at the back. And of course, the Giant Slayers here getting 2 chevrons, 1200 value. This one not doing as well, but still, these guys push through the Black Ark Corsairs, run into the back lines, just run down the Dark Shards and also pressure a lot of routing units, preventing them from returning to the middle main engagement, just doing some really solid work. Rangers though, some of them got shut down by the mobility pressure, but this one got back 900 value, so pretty decent stuff. The MVP here definitely lies in Thorek Ironbrow getting 2000 damage dealt against a bunch of armored infantry of the Dark Elves, as well as beating down Morathi. Master Engineer as well, using their long-range attack to snipe out Morathi when she was stuck in the air, unable to dive down. As for the Dark Elves, Morathi only getting 1600 value, not the greatest value of all. Bleak Swords getting ruined by the buffed up Slayers. Black Ark Corsairs not recovering their value as the armor-piercing Giant Slayers are just hacking them apart with those two-handed axes. Harganev Executioners did a lot better, these ones actually getting a lot of value, no doubt from cutting down the Master Engineers. But still, they get dispatched by a bunch of unbreakable infantry and really getting worn down hard, even by some beat up Giant Slayers. Dark Shards getting quite a bit of value on this one, but this one got pressured away by the Slayers. As for the Dark Elf mobility here, none of them were able to do too much damage as the Slayer's presence is basically the bane of their existence. Bolt throwers though, no artillery for them to snipe out, so in the end, this one getting okay value, but with the Slayer pressure pushing for their artillery crew, they weren't allowed to fire for too long. That's basically it for the army performances, and let us move on to the army selection screen and check out how does this build actually works. For the army breakdown, the leadership wise, it's a must to bring Thorek Ironbrow on his Anvil of Doom. Anvil of Doom provides him with 25% physical resistance and 15% extra magic resistance, also 900 more HP, so that provides him with a lot more survivability in engagements. Now for abilities, runes and items, a must-have is definitely Rune of Speed. Providing that 24 melee attack coupled with Rune of Doom, you can have a whooping plus 48 melee attack if you timed it right. This is particularly important for Slayers as they do not have the best melee attack against infantry. Yes, they do a lot of damage against monsters, but that is because they have bonus versus large to buff up their attack against large targets. But with infantry in front of them, they do not do so well. With the extra attack, you can basically shred through regular infantry like paper, really tip the engagement in your favor, like something say High Elf Rangers. As for the rest of the abilities and items, they are pretty much optional. You might want Forge Fire because of that minus 15 armor coming in handy for the regular Slayers, as they do not do the best armor piercing damage. Rune of Hearthland Home, definitely skipping this one because immune to psychology is useless on Slayers. They are all unbreakable anyways. Master of the Ancient Lore, a must have, as the minus 5 ability recharge comes in really handy to spam more Rune of Speed. For the rest of the runes, you will want something like say Rune of Wrath and Ruin to clear out the chaff of your opponents, as well as Rune of Negation for that emergency damage resistance. Rune of Open Steel not exactly the most useful here, as your opponents facing dwarves will usually bring armor piercing, so that plus 30 armor doesn't really do much. Rune of Breaking, it might come in rather handy if you're dealing with some armored units with only your Slayers left, but it does not have an AoE effect, so the effects it has on turning around engagements is actually rather limited. Rune of Slowness, theoretically a very useful rune, but personally I prefer not to bring it. As for the reason why, I'll explain it when I get to the supporting heroes. Items wise, Thorek's Rune Armor, plus 15 armor, plus 10% flame resistance, not the most useful ability around, as I said before, your opponents are probably bringing armor piercing anyway, so that plus 15 armor probably won't do too much. Now for the hero support. Double Master Engineers with double Flash Bombs and double Fiery Ring of Thorek. The reason why I choose these guys is, first of all, they have great sniping power against low entity units or single entities. With that armor piercing firepower, they can snipe out big targets, they can snipe out air targets, just like Morathi in Disguise couldn't dive down due to the Slayer presence, while the Master Engineers can just stand back and slowly chip away her health. Their only weakness is probably giant monsters charging in trying to stomp them into the dirt, but wait, giant monsters? Well, that is not a problem for this build at all. With all the Slayers around, whatever giant monsters trying to charge in will be cut to ribbons. For the abilities, you'll definitely want double Flash Bombs. Now, the reason why I bring this is because they are just much better than Rune of Slowness. Yes, an overcast version of Rune of Slowness provides the same speed debuff, but it is an overcast version. It has a 120-second cooldown, as well as a 60-second cooldown for the common runic spell slot. Now for this build, you rely on constantly spamming Rune of Speed and Rune of Doom to buff up your Slayer's damage, and with the Slowness rune occupying a spell slot, it might actually get in the way. But with Flash Bomb, you don't have that kind of worry. Moreover, Rune of Slowness having a 5-second casting time means that the minus charge bonus effect on the spell doesn't really work. By the time you actually cast the spell, your opponent is already probably balls deep into your unit, and the charge bonus is already wearing off anyways. Flash Bomb instead debuffs the melee defense of your opponent, so your units can just cut through their defenses much easier. And not to mention that Flash Bombs are AoE effects, so one Flash Bomb in the area basically debuffs all the units in the vicinity, while Rune of Slowness only targets a single unit, so Flash Bomb is just much more superior. Items wise, you want Fiery Ring of Thorek. Now, Slayers having low armor means that they take full damage from even the lowliest of chaff, so breath spells like this can effectively clean up the chaff and allow Slayers to focus on more important targets. As for the rest of the build, of course you want to bring a bunch of Slayers. For me personally, I'd like to bring 5 of them with 2 giant Slayers, providing that armor piercing against armored units, armored infantry, armored monsters, armored cavalry, and whatnot, while the regular Slayers will be clearing out the chaff. The rest of the funds can be spread into something say range power. A couple gyrocopters can be viable, or if you want, a couple of Buckman's Rangers as well. The reason why I like to bring Buckman's Rangers is because they are decent in melee combat, and also regeneration means that they can hold out decently if the Slayers are not in place to protect them. While gyrocopters are just great against something like say non-armor piercing archers, with their armor to tank out the missile fire while using their steam guns to blast them down. And also, with decent speed and their aerial advantage, they can basically survive from any ground force, because they just simply can't be touched. Now with the army breakdown over, let's go into the battlefield again and see how this build can be applied in practice. This build pretty much only have one playstyle: you rush. With minimal range power, yes, you have rangers or gyrocopters, but they only exist as some form of countermeasure against opponents' range firepower. Now, with all the killing power lying in your slayers, you get them into melee. You rush, you push forward, trying to get them into hand-to-hand combat against your opponent's infantry, then buff up your slayers with Rune of Speed or Rune of Doom. With their high weapon strength, 48 on the regular slayers, 50 on the giant slayers. As long as their hit lands with the help of your melee buffs, those hits will hurt. As for Thorek, he is a pretty good melee combatant, and very tanky on his Anvil of Doom, so don't be afraid to dump him into melee combat. He will do just fine against pretty much any target. Also, his auras are pretty valuable in melee combat, as the debuff to armor will help against any armored targets. Now engineers, you prepare them, ready them to throw flash bombs into any mobility your opponents might have to slow them down. And of course, sit back and snipe any valuable targets such as flyers, or in this case, Rotten Leviathan right here. Their armor-piercing missile damage will be very reliable against these kind of targets. And if your opponents bring too much chaff or physically resistant units, use your magic AoE attacks to clean them up. You have the Fiery Ring of Fury to spam, or you use the Rune of Wrath and Ruin to counter units such as the ethereal units, Sirens over here. Now of course, you can't talk about an army without discussing the strengths and weaknesses of the build. Starting with the strengths, this build is not reliant on morale at all. It is not a problem since, well, everything in here for the infantry line are unbreakable. You have the slayers here being absolute chads, never backing off, and which means they're extremely sticky in battle. Basically, if you have a unit of slayers even down to say 10 models, they can still be a nuisance for your opponent to deal with. Imagine they have an idle missile unit or a returning reinforcement of swordmasters. They have to push for your backline or trying to get to your lords or heroes, but then there are 10 slayers depleted but not breaking, not backing off, standing in the way. Now they have to deal with them getting tangled up upon these depleted unit with no choice but to kill them off before proceeding to the next target. Not only do they have to take damage from fighting these slayers, this buys time for the rest of your units to deal damage or do whatever they're supposed to do, and whatever your opponents have will be wasting their time on dealing with these slayers, pausing their shooting for the moment, or just forced to hang back and deal with the slayers first. Secondly, the slayers have powerful melee prowess. Yes, they might not be the best in handling infantry, but with the buffs from Thorek, that sweet 48 melee attack buff, with Rune of Doom and Rune of Speed combined, they can shred through any kind of infantry. Yes, armored infantry might be a problem for regular slayers, but if you have giant slayers, dump them into combat and buffed up by all the runes and whatnot, even chosens will get chilled through pretty easily. And with all the anti-large lying around, any attempts to monster mash will not be successful. They will simply get dragged down by all the angry naked dwarfs. As for their weakness, slayers themselves are a pretty costly unit and pretty glass cannon as well. That means you cannot afford too many infantry, you can't bring wide builds, and of course you can't bring too many missile units, only limiting yourself to say 2 units of bugmans or 3 units of rangers or a couple of gyrocopters. Meaning if your opponent has enough firepower, they can easily overwhelm your ranged contingent. Say 3 units of Sisters of Avalon or a few more Dark Shards would be enough to beat back your rangers, your gyrocopters and whatnot. And slayers themselves, not having any armor, they are susceptible to a lot of missile fire. Any skirmishers can deal a lot of cost-effective damage against them, as every missile that hits home on these slayers will deal full damage. Of course, you do have a little bit of armor given by Thorek's rune armor as well as his Rune of Oath and Steel, but then it's really not optimal, especially against something like Shades who have armor piercing. Your slayers will suffer heavily against their missiles, even with any armor buffs. Even more so for giant slayers who do not have any missile block chance for themselves. Your army also relies heavily on Thorek's buffs to do the damage. Slayers themselves rely heavily on the bonus versus large against large targets, and against infantry, their attack stats 38 in general is just not quite enough against the best infantry your opponent might field. That's why the Slayers need Thorek to actually do damage. Otherwise, they'll trade pretty poorly even against something cost less than them, like High Elves Rangers. And the only way to prevent this from happening is to cut them down before they kill you. And that means buff up your units with a well-timed Rune of Doom and Rune of Speed and shred through them. If you fail to provide that buff on a good timing, then your Slayers might have to fulfill their oath on the battlefield and die an honorable death, or maybe a dishonorable one, depending on the situation. And of course, Slayers having no armor means that they take a lot of damage from any units, even from fodder units like zombies and peasants. If your opponents have too many models, too many units, you might struggle to cut through all of them in the end, as your Slayers will eventually be dragged down. And that's why I am such a big advocate for Fiery Ring Authority as well as the Rune of Wrath and Ruin in this kind of build. Yes, Slayers are fast, but still they're still slower than Skinks, and they're slower than a lot of Skaven units. You have no mass, you're all infantry. The only mass is your Thorek, Ironbrows, Anvil of Doom. So any chariots might be a huge problem for you. Yes, you have flash bombs to slow them down, but they can still just plow through once the slow wears off. So do keep in mind of those weaknesses when you field this build. Prepare yourselves for a solution once the issue arises in battle. In conclusion, this is an extremely aggressive dwarf build. You have a bunch of Slayers just rushing forward, not stopping, using that massive attack buff from Thorek to punch through your enemy lines and go straight for their hearts. Your Slayers being all juiced up with steroids should be able to cut through most of your opponent's infantry, while Thorek being a support lord is also a pretty powerful melee beast, bashing his enemy's skulls in with his runic hammer. This is only available all thanks to the new runic magic system for the dwarves, which is a massive boon, especially to the Slayers, providing a lot of valuable buffs to this glass cannon infantry of the Dawi. So there you have it, an aggressive Slayer build with support from runic magic of Thorek. I hope you enjoyed the video and thank you for watching. And if you do like it, be sure to subscribe, as I'll be uploading more content on Total War Warhammer 2 online multiplayer in terms of tips and strategies, wild builds like this one, or just general battle replays. And if you have any replays that you want to showcase, feel free to drop by my Discord or send me an email and share me the file. I'll be sure to have a look at it and see if I can make it into a video. And yeah, that's basically it for today's video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Tactical Lich, signing out.